Dalai Lama's succession statement: a strategic defeat for China, diplomatic win for India. The Dalai Lama has taken a decisive step to anchor his succession in Tibetan spiritual authority, ensuring continuity of leadership posthumously. Top intelligence sources say his statement preempts any Chinese propaganda or parallel installation efforts with Panchen Lama's appointment. The statement, Wurs say, also reflects a diplomatic win for India and Dharamshala. The Dalai Lama has clearly stated that the institution of the Dalai Lama will continue through his succession, reversing the ambiguity he maintained since 1969 about whether the lineage should persist. Now, he confirms that the lineage will continue beyond his lifetime. Top intelligence sources emphasize that the Dalai Lama's statement neutralizes Beijing's narrative that the Dalai Lama's role is outdated or that his successor can be controlled through state machinery. It creates a shield around his reincarnation, rooted in tradition and institutional legitimacy, making any future Chinese-appointed Dalai Lama appear inauthentic. Intelligence sources also note that the inclusion of consultations with Mongolian, Russian, Himalayan, and Chinese Buddhist communities internationalizes the selection process and signals broad legitimacy. Operationally, it empowers the exile apparatus, including the Gadan Phadrang and the Central Tibetan Administration (CTA), to begin preparing succession mechanisms discreetly before his passing. Nanan intelligence sources reveal a significant setback for China and a gain for India, as the Dalai Lama's recent speech directly challenges Beijing's long-term Tibet strategy. According to sources, the Dalai Lama's clarification of his spiritual succession mechanism represents a substantial strategic blow to China. By declaring that only the Gadan Phadrang Trust will oversee his reincarnation, the Dalai Lama has completely invalidated any future Chinese governmental attempts to appoint a Dalai Lama. Intelligence sources highlight that such an appointment by China would lack both political and spiritual legitimacy and be perceived globally as fraudulent. Sources also note that Beijing's efforts to use soft power in Tibet have been undermined. Chinese investment in the Panchen Lama has been rendered futile by the Dalai Lama's statement, which has presented him as a progressive, consultative leader deeply rooted in traditional Buddhist authority. Top intelligence sources underscore that with the Gadan Phadrang Trust operating under Indian protection in Dharamshala, the recognition locus of the next Dalai Lama and the seat of Tibetan spiritual legitimacy are firmly established on Indian soil. This development showcases India's soft power throughout the Buddhist world. Nations with substantial Buddhist populations, including Mongolia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Japan, Bhutan, and Vietnam, are now more inclined to seek moral and spiritual leadership in Buddhism from India rather than China. Sources point out that India, by providing asylum to the Dalai Lama and upholding religious freedom, exemplifies its liberal and democratic values. Conversely, China's authoritarian control over religion and attempts to manipulate reincarnation processes reveal its repressive regime image. Intelligence sources further indicate that an India-backed succession will possess greater spiritual authority, especially among Himalayan Buddhist communities in regions like Ladakh, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, and Tawang, neutralizing Chinese attempts to assert influence in these areas. Sources affirm that the Dalai Lama's statement aligns with internal Tibetan sentiment, indicating that decades of Chinese repression have failed to extinguish Tibetan faith or loyalty. This represents a defeat for the Communist Party and subtly reinforces India's Tibet policy. The Dalai Lama's announcement has profound spiritual significance, offering an opportunity to shape the future of Buddhist diplomacy and Tibetan identity from Dharamshala rather than Lhasa. The Gadan Phadrang Trust, which is the private office of the Dalai Lama, has been given exclusive authority to identify and authenticate his successor, effectively delegitimizing any Chinese state-backed attempts to install a rival reincarnation. No external actor, political or religious, can interfere in this process, the Dalai Lama stated. The defined procedure of recognition involves consultations with high Tibetan lamas and references to Dharma protectors, spiritual entities tied to the Dalai Lama lineage. Sources say this process rejects any claims by China or unauthorized actors, ensuring the continuity within a pan-Buddhist, exiled spiritual framework. Nanananan The Dalai Lama has made it clear that only the Gadan Phadrang Trust, the office of His Holiness, holds the sole authority to recognize his future reincarnation. Swipe left for next video. The process by which a future Dalai Lama is to be recognized has been clearly established in the September 24, 2011 statement, which states that responsibility for doing so will rest exclusively with members of the Gadan Phodrang Trust, the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. They should consult the various heads of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions and the reliable oath-bound Dharma protectors who are linked inseparably to the lineage of the Dalai Lamas. They should accordingly carry out the procedures of search and recognition in accordance with past tradition. He Sati hereby reiterate that the Gadan Phodrang Trust has sole authority to recognize the future reincarnation. No one else has any such authority to interfere in this matter, the Dalai Lama stated. Latest blogs.